Hey boys and girls, so today we're going to read a story that we are really familiar with, and that is the story Little Red. Remember this story? Perfect. Now before we begin, I want to teach you a word, and that word is imposter. Can you say imposter? Awesome. When someone is an imposter, that means that they are pretending to be someone else. Ooh, and in this story, someone is pretending to be someone else, and they are being an imposter. Do you remember who the imposter is? Right, it's the wolf. Very good. How is the wolf being an imposter? Right, he's pretending to be Little Red's grandmother. That's not okay, right? That is not okay. Being an imposter is sad, sad news. And this wolf, he pays for it later because remember, by the end, he gets to go back in the animal control officer vehicle. So yeah, being an imposter is not good. So in this story, we're going to be reading it and we're going to hear all about the wolf being an imposter. But I want to talk a little bit more about that, okay? So what I want you to be listening and watching on the pictures is what the wolf does to be an imposter. How does he act? What is he wearing? What does he sound like? Okie dokie? Okay, let's read our story. Here we go. This is called Little Red. Once upon a time in a town not far away, there lived a sweet little girl and her mother. The little girl's mother made her daughter a beautiful hat from red wool. It suited the little girl so well that she wore it every day, and for that reason, everyone called her Little Red. One day, her mother told Little Red that her grandmother was sick with a cold. She handed her a basket to take to her grandmother. In the basket, there was a jar of soup, fruit, and bread. Little Red set out immediately to go to her grandmother who lived across town, and to get there, she had to go through the woods. On her way, she met with a wolf. The wolf asked Little Red where she was going. Not knowing that the wolf was dangerous, she answered, "I'm going to see my grandmother, who lives behind the movie theater." "Well," said the wolf, "and I'll go and see her too. I'll go this way and you go that way. We will see who gets there first." Little Red took her time. She stopped to smell the pretty dandelions. She listened to the singing and chirping of the birds. She lay down and watched the clouds dance across the sky. Little Red loved the way the sun felt on her face. She sat down on a rock and ate one of the apples her mother had placed in the basket. The crisp, tart taste of the fruit filled her mouth with the nicest sensations. The wolf instead ran as fast as he could, and since he also took the shortest path, he arrived at Grandmother's house well ahead of Little Red. He knocked at the door. "Who's there?" cried Grandmother from her bed. "It's me, Little Red," replied the wolf, disguising his voice. Grandmother was delighted that her granddaughter had come to see her. So before, look, who's he pretending to be here? Right, he's pretending to be Little Red. He's an imposter, because is he Little Red? No, sad news. She said, "Come in, sweet child," without even looking at the window to make sure that it was her grandmother or granddaughter. The wolf opened the door and immediately grabbed Grandmother, tied her up with the belt of her robe, and tossed her in the closet. Then he took one of her nightgowns, put it on, and climbed into her bed. He anxiously awaited the arrival of Little Red. Wow, okay, so he is being an imposter. He's trying to be who? Right, Little Red's grandmother. What did he do here to look like Little Red's grandmother? Right, he put on her nightgown, right, and her glasses to try and look more like the grandmother, but he's an imposter. After some time, Little Red knocked at the door. Tap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" cried the wolf, again disguising his voice. Little Red, hearing the big voice of the wolf, was worried. She thought to herself, that cold must have made grandmother's voice hoarse. It's your granddaughter, Little Red. The wolf cried out to her, softening his voice as much as he could. Come in, sweet child. Little Red opened the door and headed straight to her grandmother's bedside. As she got close to the bed, she was frightened. Her grandmother didn't even look like herself. The cold had made her eyes look strange, and her nose was several times its normal size. Thinking that her grandmother's ears must also be stopped up, she moved closer and said in a loud voice, Grandmother, you don't look like yourself. What big eyes you have. All the better to see you with, my dear. Thinking her grandmother might not be able to see her very well, Little Red moved in closer. She noticed the grandmother's sweet powder smell was missing. Grandmother, you don't smell like yourself. Little Red then reached for her grandmother's hand, but the wolf's paws didn't feel like her grandmother's soft hand. It was rough and coarse. Immediately, Little Red let go. She moved in a little closer and surveyed her grandmother's face more carefully. Grandmother, what big ears you have! Grandmother, what big teeth you have! All the better to eat you up, growled the wolf as he jumped from the bed and attempted to grab Little Red. Little Red jumped away in the nick of time. Thankfully, the wolf in his haste got all tangled up in Grandmother's nightgown. He tripped and fell flat on the floor, bumping his head as he hit the ground. He was knocked out. Little Red pulled her cell phone from the pocket of her cape and dialed 911. After she told the operator what had happened, she began to look for her grandmother. She glanced around the room. Her grandmother was nowhere in sight. She sniffed the air, but there was no hint of grandmother's sweet powder, only the smell of eucalyptus. Little Red stood still and listened quietly in hopes of hearing her grandmother. Aha! What was that? She was sure she heard someone knocking. She used her ears to follow the sound and ended up by Grandmother's closet. She opened the door, and there was her grandmother. Little Red untied her, hugged her, and helped her back to bed. As Little Red watched the animal obedience school officer haul the wolf out to the wagon, she thought to herself, I sure learned an important lesson today. I will always trust my senses. That wolf didn't sound like my grandmother, he didn't look like my grandmother, he didn't smell like my grandmother, and he didn't feel like my grandmother. He was an imposter. My senses told me that. The end. Give that story a round of applause. All right, let's go back to the term imposter. What does Little Red mean when she says the wolf is an imposter? Right, the wolf was pretending to be his or her grandma, right? Yeah, sad news. Well, let's take a look at something, okay? Because at this moment, Little Red does not know that this is the wolf. She's kind of starting to figure it out. But there are some similarities, which means the same, and some differences, which means different than her grandmother. So I want you to take a look at the wolf being an imposter. And I want you to tell me one thing that was the same as the wolf and the grandmother, and one thing that was different than the wolf and the grandmother. So my thing that was the same is that Little Red thought that the wolf was her grandmother because her grandmother was in bed. So that was the same. They were both in bed. Now what's different is if you look at his claws, those are not grandmother's claws. So that's how they are different. They're the same because they're both in bed, but they're different because of their hands. So I want you to tell me one thing that is the same about the wolf and the grandmother, and one thing that is different that made him an imposter.